Seb, welcome on the podcast.
Good morning, Jake. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. So I'm gonna throw you straight in the deep end, and we're gonna start with a awesome discussion, which is a comment that you made in a Telegram group where I recently picked up. I was like, okay, I've got to get Seb on the podcast and chat this through. And you were talking about owning Bitcoin in self-custody versus owning something like MicroStrategy. So just to go straight into the weeds of what we should be investing in, like what were you trying to think about and why is that important to you? And just run us through what you were thinking.
I think that was last November, probably, and it was more that I was calling the top in MicroStrategy versus Bitcoin, like denominated in Bitcoin.
Mm.
It started off like, is it maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago? I was talking to my Bitcoiner friends, and I said, I do like what this sailor guy is doing. I like him borrowing money against his shares and buying Bitcoin. And I think that's a valuable exercise. So, in fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to borrow some dollars against my Bitcoin, buy MicroStrategy shares with it, and see how those shares do against Bitcoin. And then, of course, we had that phenomenal rise in MicroStrategy going up, and it went up quicker than Bitcoin. It went up, it doubled, it tripled. And I think last November, MicroStrategy hit like 500. And then I was like, this seems a bit outrageous. They're like triple the value of their Bitcoin holdings. And surely that will bring in competition. Like basically, if you can just buy gold or Tesla or something and then have sort of a leverage ratio that makes you like 300% more than the underlying asset, that's just going to bring in competition. So I thought, look, they're not inventing magic. For every $1 billion worth of Bitcoin that they have, they cannot be worth 3 billion because then it could be the same for you and me. If you borrow $1 million and buy, $1 million worth of Bitcoin, it doesn't mean that you're worth 3 million all of a sudden. So I figured, let's look into the future because then you had like Preston Bish and all these guys saying that MicroStrategy is going to go to 3,000 and whatnot. Yeah, well, that's six times from 500. I don't think Bitcoin is going to move. I don't think it's going to move away from Bitcoin. I don't think MicroStrategy is going to be worth 5 times their Bitcoin holdings or 10 times their Bitcoin holdings. So I thought what I should do is get out of my MicroStrategy and just go straight back to Bitcoin and wait for the market to essentially arbitrage the premium back to less. And I looked at it now this morning, and of course, Bitcoin's off its high, but it's only about 20% off its high. And MicroStrategy is about 40% off its high. So I think I did pretty well out of it.
Awesome. First of all, like figuring out Bitcoin and being like, holy shit, this thing is going to grow from a capital perspective in a way that is likely to outpace basically everything. And so if you get
Yep.
enough capital into Bitcoin and self-custody, you just got to sit back and enjoy the ride. Now that's easier said than done. But there are also opportunities to reallocate out of Bitcoin into other things should you have the sophistication to ride those other things for the correct periods of time. And if you've got the right tools in the toolbox, then absolutely this is what investors can do. And what you've just described is a technique that actually I hadn't heard anyone do up till now. More common strategies might be like, I think Ethereum is going to outpace Bitcoin for this 6 months, and they jump on an
Yeah, yeah,
altcoin or
yeah,
something.
yeah.
But actually taking debt against your Bitcoin position and buying a publicly traded equity, that's not been all that possible to do. I think probably maybe
No.
until you've just done it. So maybe that's the first time in history that's ever been done. I don't know. But to ask, I guess, a little further then, how often are you looking for alternative opportunities to just holding in Bitcoin self-custody? And what might be some other things you look at, or is this just one?
No, I have to do it. I've been in the Bitcoin a long time. Back in 16, I got FOMO for the halving coming up back in 16. And I was like, look, I got to sell my house. I got to sell my chairs. I got to be, all in Bitcoin. So I've been all in Bitcoin, was it like,
It's
yeah,
almost
about
10
8 years
years.
now?
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty well. I've been in Bitcoin longer than that, but I've been all in for about 8 years. And I still, like, my biggest fear is to end the year with less Bitcoin than I started. And I
Mm.
don't really mind fiat or anything. So every year I have to figure out how to turn my Bitcoin into more Bitcoin,
Mm.
which is, crucial. So at the beginning of each year, I try and identify opportunities, like basically in the bear market, I might look at buying what's like the blockstream mining node, where you buy Bitcoin miners and you keep them essentially wrapped up, hoping for a bull market in Bitcoin when their price of the miners will increase faster than Bitcoin itself. But what I mostly do is I trade options, derivatives, which, I don't think you can even do when you're Australian, because the Australian government doesn't like you trading on Deribit. But in my options trading, I look at essentially Bitcoin being quiet for a while, and I see it as the quiet before the storm. Whereas, Black and Scholes option traders models say, look, the past predicts the future. If Bitcoin is flat for a while, it will likely stay flat, and therefore the options get undervalued. Whereas I think if Bitcoin is flat for a while, it's just going to break out. So then in the quiet before the storm, I try and buy some call options so that when it does break out, I actually get some more Bitcoin. At the same time, I feel tremendous emotional pain, so to speak, if there's a dip. So in dips, what I try to do is borrow dollars against my Bitcoin to essentially buy more Bitcoin as a loan, which I then pay off once the dip has recovered. And then I feel I've been rewarded for the dip, and I've hodled through the dip and actually got some more Bitcoin out of it. So every year it's a new round, it's a new game to make sure that I can cover my living expenses for the year, and at the same time not end the year with less Bitcoin, because the number one rule in life is end each year with more Bitcoin.
Mm. Wow. And I mean, something I'm guilty of is as I watch the purchasing power of my Bitcoin position increase in dollar terms, you feel richer. And so it's like, well, why don't I
Well,
just sell
yeah,
some Bitcoin because I need it for life? Now, I'm not against selling Bitcoin, but what you're just describing is the more prudent way to approach things. Is i.e., you want to finish the year with your Bitcoin balance bigger than what you started, regardless of the fiat price.
yeah,
Things crop up, you have expenses, you might have to sell. But yes, in an ideal world,
yeah.
I would follow a similar strategy to yourself.
I think like there's nothing, the opportunity cost of everything is Bitcoin. Like there's nothing worth investing in more than Bitcoin, not gold, not art, not cars or something. At the same time, there's a lot of very good stuff in life that you need to buy because you love it. I wouldn't invest in real estate, but I want to invest in a home.
Mm,
I don't want to invest, in classic cars for collector's value, but I do want to invest in a Land Cruiser to go around Australia. So invest in things you love, and
mm.
then be prudent, make sure that you don't buy things that lose value. But opportunity cost of everything is Bitcoin. So at the end of the day, nothing beats investing in that for the financial returns.
Cool. Yeah, and I'm completely on board with you there. So what we might do now then, Seb, is what would be fun, and I think people will enjoy this. You weren't always all in on Bitcoin, and right
No,
now you're currently traveling. So I'd love to learn about like where you are and what you're doing. But I just recently had an experience where I went to Sydney for a few days. I was staying in the CBD, and I lived in the corporate world for over half a decade, like 8 years maybe, as a broker in total in the shipping industry. And I forget what it's like because I opted out in a sense. I chose Bitcoin and opted out. Teach those that won't know you just a little bit about what you picked up in terms of skills in your fiat career. Options and derivatives are not the average thing that
yeah.
people come across, right? How do you get into options and derivatives, and what is your professional background? And then we'll talk through like why you chose to do what you're now doing.
So I have a good intuition or skill, or I'm good with numbers. Numbers in the sense that I'm good at, uh, seeing what something's worth, what it will be worth, what the value will be. At the same time, I'm slightly rebellious. So what happened to me is when I was 18, I was going to go study theoretical physics and mathematics and whatnot. And I was like, no, I don't really want to do that. In fact, I'm going to go escape to Australia. That's, so I escaped to Australia. And in fact, I was pretty much on the road for like about 7 years, traveling, Asia, Australia, and whatnot. And then I was like, actually, I want to stay in Australia. Unfortunately, I'd slightly overstayed my welcome, my work and holiday 1 year visa. So I got a passport scene stamp in the back of my passport, and they shipped me back to Europe. And I was like, okay, I need to up my game because, I need to become a respectable citizen so Australia will welcome me. And I started to, back then you had the point system for immigration. So I said, I need to get a degree. So I went to get a degree. And then after my degree, a university was like, well, do you want to come do a PhD with us? I said, yeah, sure, sure. And that was about essentially valuing investment portfolios and seeing where liabilities of clean energy and everything were going. So I went to a bank and I said, look, I think your investment portfolio, these companies will actually go down in the future. These companies will go up in the future. And I'm just doing this for my PhD. And what do you guys reckon? And they're like, that sounds like there's money to be made. Do you want to come and consult for us as a bank for a while? And I was like, well, not really, because you're a bank and banks are terrible. But, like, okay, I'll look at your portfolio for a month. So I looked basically into pan-European investment portfolios for a bit, trying to predict where things would be going. And after that, they were like, no, no, we really want you full time with us. And so name your price. So I named the price and they were like, yeah, fine. So then I spent a decade
Wow.
basically becoming, what was I, the managing director globally for energy and commodities for pan-European banks. So that
Wow.
gave me a decade of running, trading teams in dealing rooms like NASA, where you have all the guys, shouting and screaming. Basically, there would be a guy in Africa mining gold, wanting to hedge the gold, and an oil producer wanting to hedge oil production. And yeah, so I'd run these trading teams, essentially saying, look, the gold mine wants to make sure that it can sell his gold next year, but the jewelry guy wants to make sure that he can still buy cheap gold. So essentially making a market in all these commodities, which is great, which is awesome. It's like loads of fun, traveling all over the world. And yeah, it's not a bad lifestyle, even though it was a bit, the only thing that everything was denominated in was the dollar. So if you made more dollars, it was good. Nothing about quality of life or environment or social or anything. It was just dollars. Then in '08, well, of course, as a banker, you get options. You get, options on stock and whatnot. But I was like, can I have put options? Because I think there's something brewing and I think the market's going to tank big time. And they were like, no, you can't do that. And I was like, yes, I can. And if you don't give them to me for free, I'm just going to buy them. So I bought them, and in 2008 we had the whole big crash. And
Wow.
like, yeah, you see, guys, basically I told you so.
Mm.
And now let's go back to a gold standard because gold makes a lot more sense than just printing endless money. So then I set up a precious metals desk in London. I hired about 7 guys to essentially, my thinking was helping the world or Europe back to partially a gold standard, sounder money, less cheating, more, prosperity for all, which was about the same time as somebody named Satoshi was actually doing Bitcoin. I just wasn't clever enough to get into Bitcoin straight off. But then, so what we ended up doing, essentially leasing gold from the Bank of England and then just selling it to anybody who wanted it. So we weren't really being all that helpful because we were just trading in borrowed gold. But then one of my gold guys said, actually, your gold, the old-fashioned Bank of England gold, is, physical and not that useful. Maybe you should have a look at digital gold, Bitcoin. And that's actually how I was then like, this makes a lot more sense. At that time, I told my bank, I said, look, guys, this is something that's actually maybe even better and worth looking into. And, this was a long, long time ago. They were like, no, that makes no sense. And I was like, I think it does make sense. And in fact, I'm going to quit and look at this thing a bit more.
Wow. And so when was that?
That was 2012, 2013.
Okay. And so have you been
Yeah.
sailing under your own steam since then? Or have you taken other jobs?
Yes.
Yeah, you have.
No,
Cool.
in 2013, I left the bank and then I briefly set up like a programming school for kids, basically just in the neighborhood because I was, a bit disgruntled with the education system, thinking that kids should learn to be entrepreneurial and how to deal with money and that sort of stuff and how to code rather than what they learn in school. So I set that up, teaching and teenagers to code and how to start businesses. But then after 2 years, that got really busy, so I sold that. And since 15 or so, I've just been focused. Well, I set up a Bitcoin investment fund still, because I went to a startup bootcamp
Yeah.
and did a competition, and then I won, I don't know, it was like 15,000 euro or something, with which I could buy 20 Bitcoin, which was
Wow.
awesome. And then I just put the Bitcoin on the balance sheet and the company grew. But I closed that down as well, because I talked to Andreas Antonopoulos, and he basically said, look, what you want to do with Bitcoin is not really have a company, not really do official business. You just want to get as much Bitcoin as you can, keep it private, and keep studying and talking Bitcoin forever. So I took that advice to heart, and I've been a private Bitcoiner since then.
Wow,
Mm.
Seb, cool.
Yeah, yeah,
I'd
yeah.
love to meet Andreas and talk to him at some point. Okay, and so what I always love about these stories is it's when you've worked in the banking industry like someone like yourself and for long periods of time. I know the banking industry itself is also huge. So there's like sub-markets within sub-markets of what that, catch-all phrase means. But in some ways, you've been inside the belly of the beast. That is the fiat machine. And you've chosen not to be part of it. And what I was kind of sharing earlier about like walking around the Sydney CBD is there's all the suits and you just forget what it's like. And you know that they're all walking up to like floor number whatever and they're all playing the same games, right? There'd be the gold trading desk and then there's the swaps desk and everything's going on, right? Do you miss that? Any part of you?
Yes.
Okay.
No, 100%. Yes. No, not so much the corporate life, but the thrill of the hunt. I like hunting. I like hunting for profit. I like hunting for anything. If I'm riding my motorbike and I see somebody down the road, I gotta catch them. I gotta chase them. I'm
Mm.
quite competitive, and I think trading and seeing where the future is, betting against other people, yeah, it's a way to be smarter than others, improve your worth. Yeah.
And obviously the proof is in the pudding. So if you lose all your money, then you didn't win.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And even better, like if you lose all your money as a banker, you just go to the government and complain and get some fresh,
Yeah.
fresh round of money.
And the
But
social
in Bitcoin, it's
bailout
different.
is mad,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah.
What intrigues me though is obviously you chose to leave that, even though the thrill of the chase still exists. And that's very much almost like a kind of hunter gatherer thing. And I'm with you
Hmm.
there. It's like you still want to achieve things. You're not like leaving the world of productivity. You're just doing it in a different way, more under your own steam, more accountable because you've adopted this new type of money, sound money. And right now you're traveling, right? We're on a call. It's now late here in Australia, but it's early in the morning for you. What do you get to go and do on an annual basis with your time that wouldn't be possible if you were still very much in that corporate world?
Well, let me start by saying that I'm a freedom maximalist. So I 100% want to be able to do with my time what I want to do and not be pushed into anything. I've been free to do with my time, for a while now. So the things that I get to do on per year, most people would call it a bit outrageous because I do anything, from climb, the highest mountains, go on expedition. I just now finished what they call a top to bottom expedition, riding down the Andes Mountains from northern South America all the way to the tip of Ushuaia with a bunch
Wow,
of great people. 2 months on the road.
cool.
That was awesome. Yeah, and before that, I drove halfway across Australia. I do, yeah, I do a lot of fun things. Yeah, with good people.
I'm intrigued the bike trip you've just done. So my wife and I flew to Buenos Aires in early 2017 and went south to Patagonia. We didn't make it all the way to Ushuaia, across to the west coast and all the way up. And I think a small section we did on a motorbike, but I saw guys on, big KTVs, etc., like driving around or BMWs, and it's like, oh my god, that would be a fun way to travel South America. How many of you guys were riding together? Is it like an
We,
organized? Do you take organized tours? How long does it take? I mean, and
well,
that's
actually, this
not
is,
sitting at a
yeah,
desk in a tower in Sydney, for example, right? I
no,
mean, those
no,
guys would literally
this
dream of what you're talking about.
for sure, but they don't have the time. Actually, this goes back to the COVID days when I was sort of hiding out in the Caribbean, trying to be free. I had a
Mm,
friend in Colombia with a motorbike company, adventure company, And I was like, I want to ride and I want to play, and everybody's locked down. He's like, nah, come to Colombia and we'll just, escape into the mountains. So we did, and but basically he lost his business pretty much because the government closed everything down. So he had to sell a lot of bikes at a hostel and whatnot. But he came up with the solution to start organizing adventure tours in countries that were free. So he said, "Oh, look, Namibia is not locked down, so let's all go to Namibia and ride motorbikes in the desert and just have fun."
Cool.
So it's like, that sounds awesome. And, what you should do, you should be taking payment in Bitcoin. So this was years ago. So he said, yeah, I'll take some Bitcoin. And then all the other guys on the tours, I was like, you guys should save some Bitcoin as well. And so over the years, we've traveled to a lot of countries together, scouting, touring. And so one of the guys said, look, I'm going to go with Mike, the organizer, and do this top to bottom South America thing. Do you want to come along? So I called up Mike and said, Mike, you got a space still? And he said, yeah, it's to join us in Peru, and we'll ride all the way down, Bolivia, Chile, Argentina, all the way down to Argentina. Just sign me up. I'll pay you in Bitcoin. So I flew out, and there's about 12 of us,
Okay.
3 ladies, 9 guys, all people's like trip of a lifetime, been
Wow.
saving up, that sort of stuff. And to be fair, I ride a bit like an asshole, so to speak. So I have a friend who rides the same. So between the two of us, we go ahead and
Yes.
we break the track, and our motto is ride fast, take chances.
Yep.
So
Wow.
we go ahead, we have the route, and then you have the support vehicle behind with your bag, so you don't have to carry all the stuff on your bike. And we go ahead and go find a nice steakhouse for lunch, kill the tires, and make it all the way down to the end of South America.
Epic. And it
Yeah.
strikes me that that's like plenty of time to persuade people that Bitcoin's a good idea.
Well, yeah,
And
yeah,
so I'm
and not just
intrigued. Like,
that.
do
Yeah.
do yeah, because it's funny. I find it's the type of character that you come across that's like taking risks in a calculated way can find Bitcoin very compelling. And they go, "Oh, what are you talking about? What do you mean? Why are you not in an office? Hang on, how have you
Yeah.
done 3 of these trips this year? Hang on a second. What do you know what I mean?" They get really inquisitive and curious, and often they're really
Yeah.
fun to talk to.
Have you know the theory of the remnant, right? That Francis Pouliot and Svetsky been talking about?
I have read a little about it. Yes.
Yeah, so basically, the theory of the remnant is that we don't need to convince the majority. We don't need to make Bitcoin palatable to the bulk of people. What we need to do is find the 10% of people that are slightly obstinate, adventure-minded, and we need to talk to those. Never mind the people that are never going to get it. We just need to focus on the 10% of people that will change everything. And I do find that the people that adventure, especially, motorbikes, taking some risk, personal responsibility, the conversion rate to get them into Bitcoin is way higher than, let's say, the people that you meet at some random corporate event. So all these adventure bikers over at the end of the trip, it's like, oh, how do I set up a wallet? How do I allocate? What do I do? Which I quite like because this group is now maybe a couple of hundred people um, that do the adventure rides, and they're starting to overlap with all my Bitcoin biker friends that similarly come on the tours, and there's a lot of nice synergy there.
Cool. Yeah, so interesting. Okay, and so I have one question that's popped up to my mind as we've been talking, in that you started a precious metal desk. So you presumably became into sound money and have researched what that really meant before Bitcoin came along, which for me wasn't the case. Bitcoin came, and then I was like, hang on, why are they talking about sound money? What is that? It kind of taught me the Austrian economic background to like all of this um, this theoretical world that's actually becoming real right in front of our eyes. There's lots of posturing in the gold market, and you would have followed it very closely when you were, creating products and creating markets around it. And there's a lot of talk at the moment about auditing Fort Knox or looking
Yeah,
closer
awesome.
at Fort Knox, and it's not been looked at, like it's not been officially audited for like a long time. I can't remember if it's 1953 or something insane, right?
Hmm.
Do you think that Fort Knox has the gold levels that they say or
No
not?
chance.
No
No
chance.
chance. No chance. No, no, no,
And
no,
what does that
no.
mean if that was proven to be true?
Well, the dollar not being backed by gold, not that much, apart from the confidence in the USA. Like basically,
Yes.
about half the people still think that, the pound, the euro, the dollar are backed by gold, which obviously is not the case.
Mm.
And most central banks, like the Dutch central bank, the English, even the Fed, they basically state, yeah, we keep the gold for just in case in the future. And that the Fort Knox doesn't have the gold, in practice, it won't make that much difference, apart from it will get people thinking, well, so what is it backed by? Why is it that, and then people might start thinking, maybe actually sound money is not so bad.
Mm. It's almost like, and you're absolutely right, that the dollar hasn't been pegged to gold for a long time. So the actual
71.
kind of the actual mechanics of the value of the dollar don't change because everyone knows they just print as much as they want. But the confidence in the United States government would take a big blow. And that has to have a seismic shift in all sorts of different markets. In particular, it's like, well, hang on, if we're going to audit Fort Knox, well, why don't we go and audit the Fed? And actually, hang on a second, where did that 2 trillion go that disappeared the day before 9/11? And do you know, there'd be just like far too many
Yep. Yep.
questions that will come up that they don't want asked, I would assume. And I use that phrase they loosely because it always kind of
Yep.
frustrates me. But if you're looking to navigate this kind of macro landscape, like what are the things that you're looking at the moment that are of real value and what is noise?
Um, mm, well, basically, the real value is the debt of the US government, ironically. So it's not so much whether or not they have the gold, because, that's worth a few trillion. All the gold together is worth 20 trillion. But the annual deficit of the US is like 7 trillion. The moment is more gutting the debt that will be of value and not so much what they have. Like in the US, okay, they have a strategic petroleum reserve, strategic cheese reserve, and a few of those things. But whatever the US has pales in comparison to their debt, $35 trillion debt. And that's what Mr. Musk is now looking into Doge. And what you said, look, they're missing 2 trillion here, 3 trillion there, essentially finding where that's gone and cutting that expenditure and cutting the fat of the sales. Every dollar saved is as good as a dollar made. So at the moment, the biggest value, I think, in both the US system as well as in Europe, Australia, is not so much finding something that's still valuable, because we know, roads, gold, all those things are valuable, but it's the other side of the balance sheet, all the stuff that we spend and that's bloated. And if we can trim that to be a bit leaner and spend a bit less and save a bit more, then I think we'll come much more back to a sound standard. Like now, finding another gold mine or making another $100 billion worth of good stuff does not balance out all the massive spending that we've done. So I think the real value at the moment is going back to spending less and getting people off the government payroll, getting people essentially off benefits, and getting more people to actually do something a little bit productive again.
Mm. And so one of my core thesis behind why you would want to own Bitcoin in a portfolio is the idea that basically there's inflationary monetary policy everywhere, and Bitcoin represents a sound money safe haven for the printing of more currency by basically everyone. What I didn't have in the playbook for Q1 this year was a Trump administration coming in and actually being more efficient. And at the moment, it's a lot of news. I don't know how much is real, but it's like, okay, yeah, we're going to actually get much closer to balancing our books than what the previous guys were doing. And basically, it's taken the heat out of the markets in a way. A lot of things have pulled back in the last kind of 4 weeks. Um,
Mhm.
is there a recession? Like the big R word has been bandied around a little bit, Or is this just like a lull before actually, do you know what? We can't balance the books anymore, and we're just going to print a ton of money using debt, and we're just going to see asset prices rocket, in particular Bitcoin. But I'd undercooked the idea that a government could be more efficient. And that's where I'd be slightly wrong. And that's where I think we're sitting at only $80,000 a coin right now. I thought it might be like double that easily by this stage. So, yeah, how are you thinking that through? And does it really affect the adoption of Bitcoin and the price?
I think it depends on your perspective on what drives an economy. Are we
Mm,
like just Keynesian, and do we say, look, we got to print and money's got to roll, and we got to fill useless plane seats and whatnot for the economy to grow? Or if we do cut the fat and get people to more productive, will that be leading to positive growth as well? What we see now in the markets is that I think US government travel has been cut by 50% in the last 2 months because all
well,
the useless flights. So all the airline stocks have gone down, quite a lot because the planes are not filled with useless
government
government
staff.
employees doing useless
It's wild, that
flights.
kind of stuff, isn't
So
it?
there's a lot of stuff like that. At the same time, like you cut, 1 million government employees, they go home. What are they going to do? My contention is that if you stop giving people free money, they will start thinking of ways to add value and do something useful for society.
Mm,
So I'm in the positive side where basically if you say to somebody, actually, you won't get disabled benefits anymore, or you won't get unemployment dole anymore, or you don't get a government pension anymore, that might incentivize those people to take some responsibility for their own lives and do something productive. So where you do see now that, sure, if the government spends a lot less on, let's say, bombs and useless plane tickets and bureaucracy, oh, the economy is going down. Well, no, it's just taking the hot air and the bullshit out of the economy. At the same time, bringing a lot of smart people to market to maybe start a business and do something useful. So I don't think that the Bitcoin only gets value from printing money. And in fact, all the value that Bitcoin gets from printing money isn't really value. It's just the dollar going down. If
yes.
you double the amount of dollars. So Bitcoin now being at it, like what I'm hoping for is that they don't print a whole lot more money to make the denominator of Bitcoin less valuable and therefore Bitcoin look more valuable. What I'm hoping is that the US government will actually start producing really cool stuff, maybe Optimus Prime and whatnot, and that the actual value added to society will be reflected in the Bitcoin price. It's the productivity, the efficiency. So whereas, I mean, I am, in one sense, an accelerationist. I've been always been like, okay, let's just essentially print to infinity. Bitcoin goes to the max, and we'll all live happily ever after. Now I'm more like, hey, Trump and Musk maybe are doing a good thing. Let's cut the deficits. Let's cut the spending. Let's get to being actually productive and making America great again. And then see that productivity increase reflected in the price of Bitcoin rather than just the reverse of the dollar going down.
Mm. And this is a very, I mean, I love what you're talking about here. So there's basically two things. Like, yes, maybe we could just hope they press the hyperinflate button and therefore the dollar figure of Bitcoin goes to the moon. But like, what does it buy you? And actually, it may still buy you the same amount of gold. And what that
Yeah,
would mean is the
well,
extra
yeah,
value has not been created and gone into Bitcoin itself.
yeah,
And that really is a very important point. This is then a very generalist sweeping comment. So, take it as that. But there's that whole point, isn't there? It's like, don't trust, like, a man who's incentivized not to think because they're being paid by the government is going to continue not to think because they're being paid by the government, and they'll always vote
yeah.
for the government. So the idea of a democracy is a sham when half the labor force is paid for by the government. And it's
Mhm.
the education system or the healthcare system or the police force or you name it, right? It's like you don't actually benefit from pushing back in some ways, but actually now you've lost your job because no one needed it in the first place. Well, what are you going to do? And I'd like to think that someone who then reacts and betters themselves will feel better. Do you know what I mean? They
Exactly.
would have got off their ass and done something about it,
Yeah,
and the free
yeah.
market will evolve and an opportunity will arise. And actually, they didn't need the benefits or they didn't need the pension because actually they're only 35 and they could find a different job to teaching for 45 years. And that's actually really cool. And you can feel that literally in my own body, like how much better people would feel. when they're working like that.
Well, exactly. We meant to be free and we meant to take responsibility and we meant to think of creative ways how to improve our own lives and then go into the market with proposed ways to improve everybody else's life. And the free market decides if that's worth it. If you figure out a way, let's say, oh, I'm going to improve everybody's lives by raising great cattle and making the best steaks, and the market values it, that's how we progress as society, which is in part why I wanted to go to back to Argentina, because we got Milei here, the libertarian
Yes.
president, essentially freeing up the market. So I wanted to see, does that actually lead to an increase in
Interesting.
entrepreneurial activity and more businesses happening?
And okay, let's talk about that because I'd love to hear. I heard some anecdotal stories, admittedly, but Millet had opened up, for example, some of the rental market laws in
Hmm.
Buenos Aires, and there had been
Yeah.
some really interesting reactions to how that was functioning, and also something to do with airlines, but I can't remember the specifics. So now you've been there and seen what's going on. What can you see has shifted?
I heard the same examples about the rental market and about public transport, a lot of things. So what I heard is basically that there was a lot of bureaucracy. If you wanted to rent out a house, you had to pay tax, you had to get a government license and whatnot. And what Milei said, look, everybody can just rent out whatever they want, charge in whatever currency that they want, and let's see how we go from there. And then suddenly a lot more people rented out their spare rooms. Their average rent sort of decreased by half, and everybody was a lot happier, which seems to make a lot of sense to me. So what we did is we went to like real estate agencies and looking in the window and looking at rental prices and stuff, and it does seem to be a better market. Um, and what I particularly noticed now that it's all denominated in US dollar. And in fact, a whole bunch of change offices have sprung up about town where if you basically go to a shop, you have your pesos price. If you pay with a credit card, it's 10% more expensive because the banking system still totally sucks and doesn't work.
Hmm.
If you pay in US dollars, you get a 10% discount. But
Wow.
if you do go to a change shop and you essentially, because Bitcoin is in hot demand, you give a change shop some Bitcoin, you get so many pesos for your Bitcoin that your effective discount is more like 20%.
Wow.
So going to Buenos Aires, you could live with a 10% discount of cash dollars, but you can actually live with like a 20% discount on everything on Bitcoin.
And do all of those exchange stores that you visited take Bitcoin? Like
Yes.
they're conducting business in
Yeah.
Bitcoin, and this is the wild thing, isn't
Yes.
it? Wow.
Yeah.
I was the MC for the Indonesian Bitcoin conference in October of 2023 now. It's about 18 months ago. And a lot of my Bitcoin journey up till that point was A, during lockdowns, like really getting into the weeds in like 2020 and 2021. I'd owned it since 2015 for 5 years, but it was a small allocation of my portfolio and my attention, frankly. It wasn't until like 2020, everything changed. But a lot of my exposure to Bitcoiners was Australia. And suddenly I was in Indonesia and I was meeting guys from Vietnam, Malaysia, the Philippines, Indonesia itself, of course, Singapore. And it just hit me so hard that like to kill this thing, you have to kill everyone.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so like you describing the experience of dealing with Bitcoin in Argentina, it makes anyone that's like, oh, the government's going to ban it, or the classic FUD that
Yeah.
people will complain about.
Yeah.
It's like it's being used all the time in all of these places already, but you're going to say it's not useful. Like, come
Yeah.
on. And basically,
Yeah.
those type of characters are a waste of time for me. It's just like, forget it. I'm not even going to bother spending any time talking to you,
Yeah.
which is sad in some ways, but how cool. And so, on your travels, then, is there anything else that you've picked up? Oh, how do I say this? I often take inspiration from what's proving to be more and more kind of spiritual signals that I see about like what might make a good investment. So is there anything that you've picked up on your travels that you've noticed that you didn't expect, or that is helping form an opinion on where things are going?
Yes. Well, let me start by saying that I've made a point of traveling to pretty much all the Bitcoin meetups, conferences, and communities pretty much around the world that I could find. So, anywhere in
And that's of course
Philippines,
where we met
Vietnam.
in Sydney. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. So what I've been doing essentially market research and how does Bitcoin affect local cultures? How do they take it up? I've been to Bitcoin Beach in El Salvador, lived there a while, Bitcoin Jungle, taxis everywhere, and basically seeing which people adopt Bitcoin, how do they adopt Bitcoin, how does it change them? And a lot of the official Bitcoin communities, I'm a little bit skeptical of because it's largely we'll just jack up the prices a bit in Bitcoin and then convert the Bitcoin that we get from the Bitcoin tourists back to dollar.
Mm.
But there is a lot of places where, well, Bitcoin is meat, Bitcoin is talk, and you see the same trend, which I maybe summarize as, take more responsibility, take care of your body a lot more. As you're taking care of your body, take care of your mind a lot more, take care of each other a lot more, take care of, well, the spiritual side.
Hmm.
I grew up non-spiritual. I grew up, postmodernist, cynical European. But through Bitcoin, I started basically asking what's right, what's wrong, what's good, what's a good way to live. And through that, again, I've essentially ended up in Christian doctrine, asking American missionaries in El Salvador, like, what does it mean to be good? What does it mean to be right? Through that, I actually came into a book from the atheist, Honest Money, which is basically what the Bible says about money, which is don't cheat with scales and weights. And this is a book which basically describes Bitcoin. It's like you can't cheat, you can't print, and it's basically a summary of everything that the Bible says about money. And I was like, whoa, these guys have been right. They've been essentially predicting Bitcoin. So I think, oh, what else are they right about? So from that perspective, I've started looking into, well, ethics a lot more and learning a lot more. And that's, I think, what Bitcoin brings to most people that go onto a Bitcoin standard. They do start thinking more and more like how to improve themselves and what's actually right for the world. And I think they're fabulous discussions.
Having a closer connection to a faith, how has that changed your day?
Which make me essentially a lot more optimistic.
Wow.
Whereas I would live by seize the day, who cares about tomorrow? No, I'm more like, I care a lot about tomorrow and the future, and I want to start my day by getting smarter, getting better, living a full life rather than um, just short-term hedonism.
Yeah, interesting. And kind of in some ways, what you've described is I see it in myself, not necessarily from adopting a faith so much, but more just the very clear reasoning. It's like, okay, you give someone sound money, they have a better option on the future. That increased positivity on their future basically makes them care about tomorrow a lot more. And
Yes.
the example I often give is that I was looking at sustainability as this massive thing we've got to solve. I was looking for net zero early stage companies to invest into.
Yeah.
And I was
Yeah.
fully down the like, oh my God, we've got to solve climate change whole. Having
Hmm.
been someone
Hmm.
that shipped coal, iron ore, etc. around the world, I was like, I've seen what they do. They literally dig shit out of the ground, move it to other countries, burn it in massive quantities. Like, if this is bad, then it's really, really bad. And it wasn't until the day that I realized that actually the most important thing was, in my opinion, the most important tool to help with long-term resource management is sound money,
Hmm.
because it incentivized people to think about tomorrow. And
Yep.
you've just described that also translating into faith. And I'd not
Yep.
really thought about that before. And perhaps I just haven't got there yet. Whoa. Does any of that resonate?
Yes, for sure. No, I used to work in climate change and clean energy and everything. I have changed my mind on it a bit. I mean, obviously, love the planet, love the future. I do think a lot of that is now being used more as a system of control, because,
Correct.
energy directly correlates to prosperity. So I'm all in favor of, more energy, more water, more more resources,
Hmm.
and looked into that also quite a lot. And basically, we have much more of everything than we think. The planet is much sturdier than we think. It's less fragile, and I think it's quite unfair, uncool. Like Australia is like the luckiest country on the planet with the most resources ever. And then to say, well, we can't actually use them because of some obscure reason. Like, no, you got to use your energy to make steel and make bridges and make everybody's lives better because. Well, even from a faith perspective, stewardship, like it makes everything better. Like, I think the whole notion that living and people are bad, which is essentially what we're telling the kids now. Look, just because you're breathing, you're polluting the planet.
You
I
don't
think
have
is
children. I
ludicrous.
mean, it's mad, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, don't have children.
Yeah.
No, have more children. Have as many children as you can because it's the
Yes.
best thing to do. We need more people. Yeah.
Um, I agree. I think I can't remember, I can't pinpoint exactly when, but it became clear to me that actually, if you really want to do something about sustainability, quote unquote, then actually getting people onto a Bitcoin standard is the best thing you can possibly do. And if that's true, then all these other laws and regulations that they're trying to put in on how you should or shouldn't behave are complete bullshit. And especially, it's like, oh, if you're using a plastic straw, you're bad. If you don't put the right thing in the bin for the guy
Yep.
outside to mix up and chuck in the same truck, or like, oh, if you're not using an electric vehicle, you're terrible. Even though the electric vehicle's being filled up with electricity from a coal power station. Like, there's just so many like red flags. Essentially, you start to see them more and more. But I think the really hardest thing to stomach is like the United Nations Environmental Development Program and like all of these like very high level goals they've got. That actually, like, who writes those, and like where
Well,
does that all
and the
come
question
from? You know,
And the question is, but like, why are we not making any progress towards those goals? Why, like, basically,
why
governments,
they're the
we
same as
want to
20
help
years ago? We
poverty.
haven't achieved any of them.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Because we don't want to actually get close to those goals. We just use them as a system of control to essentially keep everybody down. Everybody wants to improve their lives. What you got to give people is personal freedom, personal responsibility, and they'll figure it out. Like, don't tell them you can't use this or that form of energy. Say, look, you want more energy? You figure it out. You want to build a coal plant? Build a coal plant. So people know, each person knows for themselves best how to improve their lives, what will work, and let them get to it.
yeah, let them figure it out. Completely agree. And so, Seb, you touched on before that you have a skill, call it intuition or whatever. It'll be a blend of mathematical prowess and intuition. I think they work together for, let's say, predicting the future or seeing opportunities on the investment landscape. Now, if your own journey is a reflection of the journey of a very early pioneer, shall we say, into the Bitcoin space. And maybe I share some of the similar steps that we've gone through in our own self interest and in our own journey. What does that mean for the future of markets? So if there is this small
Yeah.
cohort of people that have gone through this transformation that now think a certain way, feel a certain way, behave a certain way, where is this all going?
I think it ties into personalities. When I got into Bitcoin, there was the whole group that was getting into it then. It was people that were a bit tech savvy. They thought about it different. They were rebellious. They've gone all in. There's a lot of the maxis, right? They're 100% in, don't care about anything else. Then you had a cohort of a lot of tech people, and oh, we're in it for the tech, right? Then you had a whole cohort of the gamblers, which were like, okay, I'm going to put $100 or $1,000 in, 10x's, 100x's, I'm good. I think we're getting to the stage now where the long-term thinkers are coming in with a portfolio, the people that actually have a bunch of assets, that have a portfolio, and that basically are thinking, look, if I add a sprinkling of Bitcoin to my portfolio, it improves the Sharpe ratio, the risk-adjusted return, all those things. So now we're getting to the stage where the people that have a fiat portfolio, do start to realize that actually just because of the numbers, just because of the correlations, just because of, Sharpe ratio, we need a bit of Bitcoin. And the only question is how much. They don't really care about the fundamentals of Bitcoin or why it's a good thing. They just know that their financial advisor reckons if you got a portfolio with 40% equity, 60% bonds, no gold, just a bit of fine art, what you do need is 3.7% of Bitcoin in that portfolio to reduce your risk. So they're not even buying Bitcoin because they think Bitcoin will go up. They're just buying Bitcoin because it reduces the risk of the overall portfolio for their long-term thinking. So what I'm hoping and what I'm pushing for is that we'll have a lot of private family offices around the world that start to get into Bitcoin before basically the BlackRocks and Fidelities buy enough or all the Bitcoin for, public pension funds and governments. I am hopeful and thinking that this is what I see is happening, is that there is essentially a race to keep the 10 million Bitcoin in private hands and get them as much as possible to family offices to be used for multi-generations, rather than into the hands of short-term investors or tech people or 100%. Like most Bitcoiners, a lot of Bitcoiners are single men with no offense, no children, not much future. So what I'm hoping is that we'll get, as much Bitcoin into the hands of family offices as possible to create a very nicely decentralized long-term dynasty of Bitcoiners.
Well, I have a lot of comments on that. It's slowly happening. I mean, if I think about the investment trust that I run with my siblings and my mum, we took a Bitcoin position,
Yep.
10%, 18 months ago. It's absolutely rocking. Thanks very much.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because one of us was a proactive Bitcoin advocate. And I think that that is an obvious thing that will happen in a lot of families where someone in the bloodline somewhere is like, I fucking love Bitcoin and we should be invested big time. And they basically bash the door down until the others agree. But it requires a lot of squabbling with your siblings and everything else for them to agree. But that's why I like the Sharpe ratio conversation, because it's actually like, guys, the financial advisor is a financial advisor because they make their money doing, discretionary investment for rich families. And if that's how they make their money and they're telling you to do it, they're the like regulated entity that actually, if you just let them do their job, they do it anyway and just get out of the way. So it's much more compelling in some ways. It's not like your annoying brother telling you to buy Bitcoin. It's actually the guy that runs the family investment fund is like, this is a good idea. I don't know how many have done it yet, but I would say conversations are happening like as we speak on a lot of levels. And the thing that resonates mostly is those family offices are family offices because they're a group of productive people. And
Yep.
we sadly live in a time in which we're taxed every single step of the way. In daily life, everything you can think of has got a tax on it. And so the fact there are families out there that have managed to actually be productive in what is basically the playing field is a deep soup of dark mud, and unbeknownst to like the wider population that are like rich people bad, tax them. They've done extraordinary things to generate wealth in a very difficult time, given how overarching the state is in everything that happens. And so if those family offices figure out a bit about Bitcoin and they get their hands on it, they've just figured out a way to obsolete owning companies, obsolete owning real estate, obsolete being in a physical jurisdiction that can tax them to high hell. And I think that's very exciting because what they then do with that capital is like, that's where we're heading.
Yeah, I think it's further along than you think.
Okay.
Australia, no offense to Australians, but Australians pretty much accept being taxed to death.
Yes.
Like I've traveled around Australia, it's like, I got Bitcoin, I'm going to pay capital gains, I'm going to do this. Whereas I'm like, if you have a family office, somebody in the family, like you're going to be a decentralized family with at least somebody in the family being in a jurisdiction like Singapore, like Dubai, like Switzerland, where your Bitcoin is not taxed. Like, I'm sorry to say, but if you plan to pay tax on your Bitcoin, you're doing it wrong. You got to keep it safe. Like, I mean, the government's quite extortionate. So there's a lot. There's Swiss banks offering Bitcoin services, and I think these family offices to take some Bitcoin and essentially keep it out of the hands of the regular financial system and governments. That's the prudent thing to do, and happening more and more. You can of course just have your tragic boating accident and keep it out of harm's way as well. And then, if it comes to time that you want to use it, maybe you move to a jurisdiction where you can. But the whole jurisdictional arbitrage, that's totally a thing in a decentralized family. Like, you have a family with a few generations. Of course, there's going to be people in different jurisdictions being able to use Bitcoin tax-free or in different ways as collateral.
That's a great shout. It's making me rethink how I've been approaching that. Or maybe that's a conversation for offline. Seb, I want to have one last question, if I may, before we close out with the hour that's flown by. Thank you so much for sharing all of this. You touched on at the very start of the conversation the fact that you were able to read a lull in the market. You were able to take debt against your Bitcoin, buy MicroStrategy, another asset, and hold it for a period of time that was more than the cost of your debt. So that is an investment strategy to capture value from somewhere else and then bring it back into Bitcoin. I'm intrigued as to how you took the debt, because there's lots of different debt products out there. Are you able to share, like, was there a particular company that you used, and how did you actually do
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, there's three that are quite useful. There's Nexo, which is a European outfit. I think Australians can use them as well. With Nexo, you can borrow against your Bitcoin. They are unfortunately also a shitcoin company, so they want you to have some tokens to get the interest down. Like borrowing against your Bitcoin can be 12 to 15%, but it can be as low as 3% if you're willing to hold some of their tokens. So it depends on your calculation on whether that's worth it or not. There's Zappo, which is a bank in Gibraltar in Spain, started by Wences, like a very OG Bitcoiner that got half of Silicon Valley into Bitcoin. They do only loan to value ratios of about 20%, which is not bad at all. And then there's like Signum, a bank in Switzerland, like a proper Swiss bank, where you can borrow against your Bitcoin, no shitcoining, no bullshit, for about 6%. So basically, at the beginning of each year, if you have some Bitcoin to say, look, I'm going to borrow some dollars, euros, Swiss francs against my Bitcoin, just to buy, either Bitcoin or MicroStrategy or gold or whatever you like, hold it for a year. What I habitually do is whenever I think Bitcoin is cheap, I borrow against my Bitcoin mostly to buy more Bitcoin and then wait a while. It's essentially the sailor playbook, right? You borrow in the currency going down and you buy the assets that are going up. So I've been doing that for the last years, and sure, I have some debt, but that debt is relatively getting less to the value of the assets that I've bought for.
that?
And the only question is, like, most Bitcoiners don't like that. So do you pay it off at some stage or not? I'm not convinced that I should be paying it off, because borrowing at 6% against the compound annual growth rate of Bitcoin, it's a pretty good deal.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I think that's a very good insight into what will be possible for most people. It'll be even easier, like the UX of that. So like the SARB 121 regulation changing in the States, for example, a lot of American banks will start offering this kind of stuff. And I guess ultimately it's just the custody angle. I did see some quite cool stuff with Hodl, which is a company
Yes.
that does non-custodial debt. So, obviously you're giving someone your Bitcoin. It's like, okay, well, if they disappear with it, then it's gone. And it's like, well, was that 6% cost of a 20% loan to value ratio worth it? Well, no. If your Bitcoin gets taken to the hills, you're screwed. But okay, awesome. Yeah, that's a great insight for people to research and to have a think about how they might incorporate. Seb, I've loved that. What an awesome conversation. Thank you. I can see the sun coming through the curtains in the background, and you'll be pumped and ready to go for a day of biking or whatever you're doing. Is there anywhere that you would like to send someone if they reach out or they want to get in touch?
I'm on X, and that's pretty much the only place that I'm at.
Cool. I'll pop a link to that in the show notes. Well, Seb, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jake. It's been great.